Well, welcome to our final teaching of our Up and to the Right teaching series, where we've been talking about how we can make choices that move us in the direction of up and to the right. I want you to think about the start of a line on a chart. When a line starts on a chart, not too much movement, right? Not too much movement, not too much difference. At that point in our lives, when we make a few different choices, doesn't really feel like it really affects our lives greatly. But as that angle were to stretch out over a lifetime, you will notice that the gap starts widening. That's exactly what happens. That's what happens when our daily choices are made in one direction. The more choices we make in the same direction moves us in a direction that we're moving up and to the right. We have all sorts of choices that we can make in our lives daily. Like, do I want to stop and grab a coffee or a tea at Starbucks, or am I going to stay at home and brew my own cup at home? Will I thrift or go and shop used, or do I continually just buy new and throw all my stuff out? Am I going to schedule time prioritizing some deep relationships in my life, or am I going to let busyness crowd my calendar that I have no time for anybody? Am I going to stop for fuel when that light comes on, or am I going to find myself stranded on the side of the road in a few days when I have no more fuel? Am I going to show up to church once a week and check it off? Or am I going to invest in the faith community that I'm a part of? The truth is, the more directions we make in the same direction, the more our lives are going to open up in that way. What seems like a tiny shift today could actually mean a very different life in a few years from now. The further you move down the line, the greater that gap makes. And when we make choices that are up and towards the right, that's how we become up and towards the right type of people. Now, at the beginning of the series, we talked about our time and how we can choose to invest our time. All the time God has given us, what are we going to do with it? The second week, we talked about our finances. How are we going to steward what God has given in our lives? Now, we have a finance course going on. I know the leader. He's pretty good. And it's going on Thursday nights online. So this is an area where you're like, I need to make better choices when it comes to my finances, I'd highly recommend you check out that course. We also last week talked about our environment. We talked about how we can make choices that impact our environment. And we released a podcast this week. I listened to this podcast this week. I was greatly encouraged. I was challenged even in the ways that I choose to live my life and how it impacts the world. And so if you haven't had a chance, I would highly recommend you check out last week's podcast. Today we're going to talk about something different. We're going to talk about peace. When you hear the word peace, what do you think of? For many, they might think of like a Zen-like type peace that you can get through yoga or meditation. Maybe the lack of noise. Maybe world peace. Maybe those peace symbols indicating good vibes for everybody. All of these things are not wrong. But the problem is that peace has become a billion-dollar industry in our world. And there's all sorts of promises that we can get this calm, Zen-like experience if we just buy the book, listen to the podcast, download the app, or go on that retreat. According to the dictionary, peace is defined like this: a state of harmony, calmness, and a lack of conflict. Now, the Bible has a definition of peace, and it actually takes it a step further. The word in the Bible that's used for peace is the word shalom. It's a Hebrew word, and it means wholeness, completeness, and right relationship with God, ourselves, and others, and the world. Shout out to the Follow podcast. They talk about shalom in what it has to do with our world. It's fascinating. But shalom is not about a feeling of calm. It's about being fully aligned and at peace in every area of our lives. Now, the Apostle Paul, he wrote about peace, and he said this: "May the Lord of peace himself give you peace at all times and in every way." That means we can experience peace in all sorts of ways in our lives. Did you know that you are designed to experience peace with your whole self? See, you were built as a whole individual. There are many parts of you. When Jesus walked on this earth, the Bible records that he grew in all sorts of different ways. The Bible says this: Jesus grew in wisdom with his mind, and in stature physically, and in favor in relationship with God spiritually and all the people. Jesus grew up in all sorts of different ways. And you are more than just your body. The Bible tells us that God developed us as whole people, and we have all sorts of interconnected parts. The first is our emotions, your feelings. Next, mental, what's going on in your brain, your thoughts, your mindsets. Physical, your body. Social, your relationships with the community around you. Spiritual, the Bible says you have a connection with God. It's a part of you. So the first truth I want to talk about today is peace is for your whole self. I always love when science affirms what the Bible is already teaching, that every part of ourselves actually affects the other parts. See, when we are physically unwell, it impacts our emotions, our mental health, and also vice versa. If your body is in pain, you're going to experience emotional distress. You're going to experience mental fatigue. When we struggle with anxiety or emotional pain, it often will show up in our physical bodies as tension and pain and exhaustion. A key factor that disrupts all of this is stress. Now, in small amounts, stress can be really helpful. It motivates us towards change, short-term stress. But long-term stress or chronic stress actually takes a toll on every part of your body. It can damage your physical health. It can cloud your mind. It can stir up negative emotions. It can strain your relationships. Stress is the absence of peace. Now, there's a very famous character in the Bible. His name is Saul. His story is found in the Old Testament in 1 Samuel. That's the early part of the Bible. And Saul is actually Israel's first king. He's chosen by God because Saul loves, follows, and is obedient to God. And for a while, everything goes great. He has a great kingdom. But unfortunately, power goes quickly to Saul's head. He becomes disobedient, which leads to a season of inner rage and turmoil and anxiety. And as a result, Saul's kingdom falls into conflict, not with just their neighboring nations, which it does, but also conflict with God himself. During that time, Saul would have been an immense pressure of leadership. I don't know if you were in a leadership position, but it comes with challenges. It comes with pressures. Saul is the king of Israel. I can imagine his pressure is on a high level. And so the Bible describes a lot about how this heavy burden affects Saul. The Bible says this: Saul realizes at some point that his troops are rapidly slipping away. And so instead of trusting God, Saul takes matters into his own hands, which causes a whole bunch of other problems. And God sends Saul a message from the prophet. And this is what God says to Saul: "How foolish that you refuse to follow God's instructions. Now your kingdom must end." And so from that point on, Saul knows that there's an end date to his reign as the king. And the Bible says that God is so disappointed in Saul that he allows a tormenting spirit to come upon him. And that fills him with overwhelming depression and distress. And then on top of everything else, Israel's enemy, the Philistines, were constantly at their door. The Bible says this: the Israelites fought constantly with the Philistines throughout Saul's entire lifetime. So King Saul, he's in conflict in every front, with God, with the neighbors, with himself, with the Israelites. And eventually it reaches this breaking point and he can't handle it anymore. And so his officials make a suggestion on how they can get Saul to calm down. I can imagine it's chaos in the castle. And so his official says this awful tormenting depression from God is making your life miserable. O king, let us help you. Let us look for someone who can play the harp. When the black mood from God moves in, the musician will play his music and you will feel better. And so Saul's officials, they find him a musician, and this musician is a young kid, it's a shepherd boy. His name is David, and he plays the harp beautifully. And so the Bible tells us that Saul has David moved into the palace permanently. And whenever, the Bible says, the bad depression from God tormented Saul, David got out his harp and he played. That would calm Saul down, and he would feel better as the moodiness lifted. How many of you would love to have a harp player? No moodiness in your house, I know, so that's fantastic, just mine, okay. When we read the account of King Saul's life, it's very apparent there's constant fear. There's constant anxiety. There's constant conflict happening. Being someone who has experienced a panic attack before, I can see evidence when I read through 1 Samuel of panic attacks having a play in King Saul's life. I remember the first time I knew I was having a panic attack We were at the airport. We were getting ready to go on vacation. We were in that security line. It was long. We had 3 little kids. Our 2 girls were in like a double stroller, and then I had our son. He was little. He was strapped to me on a carrier. So it was already chaos. The people on the line, they were chaotic. They were stressed if they were going to meet their planes. And so there was stress going on all around. And at this point, it was where you had to dump out all your liquids. They couldn't go past that point anymore. So I remember frantically looking for the water cups of all 3 kids. I couldn't find one. And because we had so much stuff with so much kids and they're just whatever backpack it's in, I couldn't find it. So Skip was like, don't worry about it. We'll just check it out when it's on the conveyor belt. They'll find it. But to me, it felt like such a big deal in the moment. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I started gasping for air. I felt like the whole room was closing in on me. An extreme panic came over my body. My heart started racing. My body felt both numb, but also very electric. My hands were trembling. My muscles were tense. And my body felt like it was on fire to the point that I frantically tried to get this baby out of the carrier and off my chest so that I could get oxygen into my lungs as my whole world spun out of control. Now, looking back, I can see what was happening. I wasn't in immediate danger. I was just having a panic attack. And a panic attack is a sudden surge of intense fear that triggers a severe physical reaction. So something was happening here, but my body was experiencing it. When there's no real danger or even a cause of what is going on. And unfortunately, you know what? I'm not alone. Experts say that 1 in 3 Canadians will experience a panic attack in their lifetime. And unfortunately, that number keeps rising due to the unrelenting stress and pressures of our life. Because the world feels kind of heavy, doesn't it? Wars are raging. Politics are dividing. The cost of living is climbing higher every day. Debt is piling up, and it feels like paychecks won't even spread to where they need to go. The pressure to hustle and achieve, keep up, is relentless. Add on any health challenge, any caregiving responsibilities, and it's no wonder why exhaustion starts to feel like it's setting in, even when there is no time to slow down and rest. And then you add on technology, the endless scroll, the notifications that never stop, the unrealistic expectations, constant information that floods our minds, but truth is harder and harder to find as conspiracy theories take over. And Dr. Google is right there. There doesn't seem to ever be an off switch to the 24/7 access we have to the world and the world has to us. Now, experts warn that this type of unrelenting stress is destructive. It's going to wear us down. It will steal our peace. It will cause us to run on empty. And this lack of peace affects every part of our lives. Notice how your shoulders are feeling right now as we're talking about it. Maybe check in with your body. Are your fists kind of clenched? Are your eyebrows maybe all furrowed up? Is your jaw clenched up a little bit? Are your feet tensed in your shoes? Is your mind spiraling? Sometimes I think we just need to take a moment to stop. Even right now. Maybe to close our eyes, and I give you permission. Close your eyes in this moment. Maybe take a deep breath and just take a moment to just be. your mind right now. Check in with your body. How are you feeling? Are you a little bit less stressed than you felt a few moments ago when we were talking about it? Is your breath more regulated? Are you calmed down? Studies show us that music has an effect on us. It doesn't just affect our mind and our emotions. Music affects our bodies. Music can lower your blood pressure levels. It can cause you to breathe in a deeper pattern. And there's a scientific reason why King Saul experienced relief and peace when David would play for him. God designed our bodies to function in this way. And there are things we can do, there's postures that we can get into that actually invite peace into our lives. Because the truth is that peace is a posture. Now I love the quote, it's from an unknown Navy SEAL, and it's under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion. We love to think that we do, right? Like under pressure, I'm just gonna rise right up. No, you sink to the level of your training. That's why we train so hard. In life, we are gonna go through seasons where we need strategies and peace in our lives. And if we have not done the work to develop those in our lives, what happens is we don't have the postures to take in the seasons of difficulty. So we sink to the level of our training. And so today I want to talk about some postures that we can take in our lives that actually invite peace into them. The first one is our physical, mental, and emotional peace postures. Now, most of us are not going to give any thought to our mind and our body and our emotions until something goes wrong, and then it's all that we're going to be thinking about. What if we didn't wait for a crisis? What if we took on some healthy habits that prepared us for difficult seasons ahead and changed the growth trajectory of our lives? The first way we can do this is to practice healthy habits daily. This is all stuff that you know. We know that our bodies and our minds are all impacted by all the different parts of ourselves. When we move and we eat and we sleep and how we breathe affects every part of ourselves. Now, I want to recognize before we go into this that there are seasons and situations where this might not be possible for all of us. See, chronic illness actually means that some of us can't access some of the things that others can. And so the principle we want to use in this section is that we do what we can when we can do it. So we do what we can when we can do it. And there is always something that we can do. The first one is this: sleep well. I pulled up this sleep chart. So this is not me, this is like Health Canada, suggests this type of sleep for your body and for your life. Now, if you are an adult, you should be getting 7 to 9 hours a night. I'm not going to even ask you, hands up. The second part actually tells you what time you should actually be going to bed. And parents, I can't help but look at this chart and think, wow, we could set up our kids in such beautiful ways to develop peace postures in their life if we prioritized their sleep and their life. The next one is eating well. Now, this is something we all know. We should be eating healthy. Experts say one of the easiest ways you can do it is actually just shop the perimeter of your grocery store. Don't stay on the outsides if you can. Stay out of the middle if you can. Your body will thank you. Your pocketbook is going to thank you if you're eating a little bit healthier sometimes not. One of the ways you can actually help your pocketbook and your body is to actually eat at home more than you eat out. I know the chaos, I know the stress, I know how much easier it is to shop outside the home and grab something quick, but experts tell us if we're eating at home and cooking at home, that's actually a better way to develop peace within our bodies. Now, I want to recognize there are some seasons which it's very difficult to put food on the table. And that's why I'm so grateful that we have a food bank at our church family. And so we offer a food bank on Tuesdays for our community. If you ever feel like you're in a season where you cannot get food on your table, I'm going to suggest you fill out our care form, and we will help you get connected to the food bank. The next area is moving and breathing. Did you know that the way that you breathe actually affects every part of your life? Because breathing actually regulates your nervous system. Both will, breathing and also moving will release tension in your body. It will actually invite peace to live within your body and your mind. Moving and breathing can trigger your body to properly rest and digest. There's lots of ways that you can move. The simplest way is just to get outside and walk. And thankfully the spring is coming so we can walk. Another way is by breathing. And I've, in therapy, learned so many ways on how to breathe. The easiest one I found is simply to breathe in for 5 seconds, to hold it for 5 seconds, to release it for 5 seconds, and then to breathe back in for 5 seconds. And it starts to put your body into rhythmic type of breathing. The second thing you need to do is we need to address issues rather than ignoring them. How many of you have wished that you had gone to see your doctor before the problem became worse? One of the greatest decisions I have ever made in my life is choosing to rely on medical professionals when it comes to my health. Rather than Dr. Google, rather than other streams, I've made a decision in my life. I will rely on the advice of medical doctors. And we have so many medical professionals in our congregation, specialists and therapy, and all sorts of different people. And so I talked to some of them this week and I said, hey, give me some tips to give to our community. What is one way, especially if someone doesn't have a family doctor, what's one way that they could get a family doctor in this season? And they recognize, you know what, there's a little bit of a difficulty in family doctors, but here's a really great tip. If you don't have a family doctor, there's lots of medical graduates that are graduating this summer coming up around July. And they're all going to be starting their practices. So getting your name on a wait list now will ensure in a few months that you come up on the wait list and you can secure a family doctor. Now, if you're in a season where you're struggling emotionally, I would highly recommend therapy. So I have spent countless hours in the therapist's office dealing with my junk, recognizing we all have junk. And if I don't deal with my junk, it affects my family, it affects my kids, it affects my community, it affects this church. So I've prioritized going and seeing a therapist. And if you're in a season where you're like, my mind is racing or my emotions are high, therapy might be a really good option for you. Our team has all sorts of therapist options. If you're looking for a counselor, reach out. We would love to connect you with one of them. Now, the next area of our lives that we can develop peace postures in is our relationships. Back to the story of King Saul and David. See, Saul's peace does not last. His anxiety turns into paranoia. It becomes irrational. He starts to think that David is going to take his throne, which is interesting because David does eventually, but God gives it to him. David never takes it. And so King Saul gets it in his head that David's going to kill him, I'm going to kill David. And so David has to run up to the mountains and hide away from King Saul. And the Bible tells us that at one point Saul is pursuing him. He's on the hunt for David's life. And Saul is in this cave. The Bible says this, Saul went into a cave to relieve himself. But as it happened, David and his men were hiding farther back at the very cave. Now this is David's chance. He can end it right here. He can go move back to the palace. So the Bible says that David's wise men whispered to him, now's your opportunity. Take it. The Lord is telling you, I will certainly put your enemy into your power to do with as you wish. This is his friends telling him this. So David crept forward and he cut off a piece of the hem of Saul's robe. Now, David is my favorite Bible character because he makes a lot of mistakes. But what I love about David is when God speaks to him, David turns around. And in the moment where he could have finished Saul off, the Bible says this. But then David's conscience began bothering him because he had cut off Saul's robe. He said to his men, I shouldn't attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen Saul. So David restrained his men, and he did not let them kill Saul. After Saul had left the cave and gone on his way, David came out, and he shouted after him, I love his posture, my Lord the king. And when Saul looked around, David bowed low before Saul. Then David said to Saul, why do you listen to the people who say I'm trying to harm you? This very day you can see with your own eyes it isn't true. For the Lord placed you at my mercy back there in the cave. Some of the men told me to kill you, but I spared you. For I said I will never harm the king. He is the Lord's anointed one. This proves that I am not trying to harm you. I have not sinned against you, even though you have been hunting for me to kill me. And what I love is that Saul responds. And Saul says this to him. Saul began to cry, saying, you are a better man than I. Now I realize that you are surely going to be the king. You notice David's posture here? He's becoming a peace extender to Saul. David could have went with a whole list of all the things that Saul had done and all the reasons why he had to kill Saul. Instead, David decides he's going to extend peace towards Saul so they're no longer at conflict. I wonder, have you ever been tempted to walk around with one of these when it comes to your relationships? An encyclopedia of wrongs. So that if you come to me and you're like, hey, I got a problem with you, I can be like, well, on Monday, January 3rd, 2000, you did this to me. And you did this to me. Friends, we are so tempted to carry around these heavy encyclopedias, wanting to let everyone know all the things that they've done that wronged us. The problem, though, is that this only hurts us. This is a weight that we were never meant to carry. And sometimes I wonder if instead of carrying around an encyclopedia, maybe we should carry around a Post-it note. A Post-it note that notes, hey, I needed to set some boundaries, because that is healthy, setting boundaries around people who have hurt us. Even means removing relationships sometimes. But a Post-it note, think of the different weight between the two. This is so much easier for us to carry. This was never meant for us to carry. This is not mine. And so sometimes I wonder if we just need to simply let those things go. Finally, there's one more peace posture I think we should consider, that God invites us to consider, and it's spiritual peace. Did you recognize that song that Pastor Stephen played for us a little bit ago? Maybe you grew up singing it like I did, or maybe it's the first time you ever heard the tune. The story about that song, it was written by a guy named Horatio Spafford. And Horatio lived in the 1800s. He was a very successful businessman. But during the Chicago fires, he lost a lot of his fortune. And during that same time, his 4-year-old son also died of scarlet fever. And so there was a deep sense of grief in their home at the time. And so Horatio, trying to get some relief for his family, plans this beautiful trip to England. And he sends his wife and his daughters on their way, and he's going to close up some of the business dealings that he has. However, while they were crossing the ocean, his family's ship collided with another vessel, and it went down, and 200 people died that day. And all 4 of Horatio's daughters were some of those that had perished. And his wife Anna was one of the few that survived. And when she reached England, she sent him a postcard. And this is what she may have sent a text, I don't know, but I think it was a postcard. She said, "Saved alone, what shall I do?" I can't imagine getting a postcard like that. And so Horatio gets on a ship and he goes to his wife. And as he is passing the spot where his daughters had died, the captain called him to the deck of the ship so that he could be there. And Horatio penned the beautiful words to the hymn that Pastor Stephen played for us today. And it says this: "When peace like a river attends my way, when sorrow like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." Friends, this is a peace posture. It's a spiritual peace posture. Over the years, I've had opportunity to sit with hundreds of people who've walked through very difficult situations. And I have noticed there is an immense difference between how we live and how we grieve in this life. And it is dependent on if we are at peace with God. The peace postures we talked about today in our health, those are temporary peace postures. They allow us to live in wholeness in this world. They're important. But spiritual peace is eternal. And the peace that Horatio is writing about is not the Zen-like type of peace that the world chases after. Despite the circumstances of his very difficult life, Horatio is not at conflict with God. So peace is available to him in a way that it was not for King Saul. The Bible describes this type of peace like this: we have this hope like an anchor for our souls. The meaning behind this is that our lives on earth are temporary. So the hope of death actually anchors us to God in eternity. The problem, though, is that our sin separates us from God. Sin creates this gap between us and God. And that's the reason that Jesus came to this world, because peace is a person, and peace is Jesus.